Hey, welcome back, Faithful Politics listeners and watchers. If you are watching us on our YouTube channel, thank you for being here. And we finally topped 5,000 subscribers, so I don't know. I'm feeling pretty good about myself. I'm your political host, Will Wright, joined ever by my faithful co-host, Pastor Josh Bertram. How's it going, Josh?
Doing great. Thanks, Will.
And joining us today is someone I've been looking forward to talking to for a while. Her name is Sarah Stankorb.
Yes, you got it.
Nailed it. We're done with the interview because I suck at last names, so we should just end it here. But she's a journalist and an author whose work shines a light on the intersection of religion, gender, and power. Her reporting has appeared in all the big news publications, the New York Times, Atlantic, Washington Post, and so many more. She's also the author of a book, Disobedient Women, which is a book that documents how women inside evangelical communities use digital platforms to speak out against abuse and build networks of accountability. And today we invited her on to learn as much as we can about Doug Wilson and Canon Press. So thank you for being here, Sarah.
Absolutely. Thanks. I'm excited to be here. I saw your calendar of folks for this month, and I know a lot of them. I've interviewed a lot of them.
I know. Well, here's the funny thing about the little Canva created image thing is normally it's something we just started doing because I'm just like, no one knows who Faithful Politics is, but they know who all these people are, so I'm going to put them all on one picture and hopefully get some people to start listening to our show. But the picture only has 8, I think, people in it, but there's 9 episodes every month. So there's one person that's not there. And if you're a really, really close listener and watcher, you'll know who didn't end up on there. And I feel terrible.
Oops. Well, you can just do a whole one big photo.
I might do the 16 by 9,
yes.
like YouTube kind of thing. But anyway, so Sarah, you've been writing about religion, culture, gender, women that are disobedient. I'm a little curious about, what kind of got you to this point in your life today? Because it just seems like a cool profession. But I wanted to be an astronaut when I was a kid, so I'm not an astronaut now. So how did you get into this work?
I feel like I could talk on this for half an hour. I wanted to be a writer, so I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, where no one had jobs. So the idea of having any job was a stretch, and then being an author was just not something. I didn't know anyone who was that. And I want to say 10th grade, our local newspaper had a teen page, and my English teacher kind of put the paper on my desk and said, you should do this. And it was the next town over. It used a lot of gas money to get there. So my mom would sit outside in the car and wait. And I had my first editorial meetings where we went in and we pitched stories and we learned how to write and we got edited, and that made me see there was at least one way of being a writer. And then later when I went to college, I learned there are other ways of being a writer. But I was a really faithful kid. So in my very Catholic town, I was voted most likely to be a nun, simply because I was so religious. I was not Catholic. I was one of few non-Catholics. But I was fascinated by religion. I was youth group president of my Methodist youth group, went to Youth Annual Conference, prayed. But I also loved the library and gobbled up all the books. So I was 13, and I'd bring home Freudian case studies because they were interesting. Then I learned all about astrology because it was interesting. I learned about reincarnation because it's what they had on the shelf, and I read books. So I think that was always stewing in me. And then by college, I did study abroad in Northern Ireland, and had an opportunity to do some archaeological volunteer stuff in Israel.
Nice.
And just sort of fell into places where religion was vital and a big part of conflict. And I think it became part of my DNA. Even as I lost my own faith, I was fascinated by people of faith.
Yeah, I really appreciate hearing your story. I love hearing people's stories, and even just like the way that they were taught to think and how they work through that. And then the process of losing your faith, having grown up in this, what a difficult and challenging process that must have been. And to work through that kind of stuff requires like a certain boldness, a certain bravery. And I'm sure that was very difficult. So I think it's pretty cool and pretty amazing. Obviously I'm a pastor, so I'd love everyone to love Jesus. But I just think it's cool when people are, they're brave and they're trying to find the truth and they're trying to really understand it. And I just really appreciate that. And I think when you were discussing kind of this initial push that you had, I felt like there was a lot of my own story that I saw in there. Although I'm a bit of a late bloomer, I didn't really get super interested in all things theological, honestly, until I got to college. But when I got to college, I couldn't stop reading and reading and reading and reading and just kept going and going and going. And I understand that curiosity, that thirst, and how people can even have faith. And, I would love for you to help us understand, like, when we're thinking about method and how you go about working through the research that you do, like, how do you balance your religious, your ethics training, and this frontline reporting that you learned to do? Do the different lenses change how you view things? Do you put them on intentionally? Does it affect how you trust sources? I would love for you to talk about method a little bit as you're entering into these spaces and how you work through it.
So I'm jumping way ahead. I now cover some very intense stories of abuse within spiritual settings. So as far as my own beliefs, they don't really matter. I mean, I'm an agnostic, so you could be right, you could be right. Who knows? Maybe we're all wrong. What I care about is people being treated properly, that the humanity of every individual is respected. As I report on people within high control religious environments, often until I really know the environment, there's a long period of education, like basic vocabulary. Like you know this quote from such and such as pastor's book. What is this book? I need to learn it. I need to listen to sermons. I need to understand the world you were a part of. But then when it comes to various allegations, like there's an art and there's a science, I guess. So after years of interviewing people who've been victims of really awful treatment, there's a way that most people who've experienced trauma will present their story. It's usually not in chronological order unless they've been in therapy for years. It zigs, it zags. It's hours and hours of just listening and recording and taking notes. And then I needed my own time to set up a timeline and then go back and say, hey, you told me this happened before this. Do I have that right? Not that I'm trying to catch someone in a lie, but if something does not add up, that's something I need to know. And then once I have the timeline in order, does it mesh with what they've told me? Does it mesh with what I've seen on the internet that they've posted? And then I started asking for additional backup. So I will say many people who are in a situation where they were not believed are desperate to be believed. So they have receipts, like they have actual physical receipts. They have screenshots. I've had a woman, I wanted to know, when did you say your parents took such and such money from your bank account? Here's my bank statement. Like there's this pile of evidence that I then have to sift through. So this is a long and arduous process for any story involving abuse. And this is something I think people forget. Like if you're reporting for a larger publication, then all this stuff has to go through legal review. After you've written the story, after it's gone through edits, then it has to go through legal. So it's not like I can just, make up a fiction and post it on the internet. That's not how any of it works. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah.
With all your work of abuse of evangelical, or women inside evangelical communities, I'm curious because I don't see it. I mean, number one, I'm a believer. Didn't grow up one, but I'm a believer now. But I'm a guy also. So like, I don't see it, nor do I experience it at all. I won't even say as much, like at all. So like, when we look at abuse in the church, like, is it abnormal when looking at like abuse outside of the church, if that makes sense? I'm just trying to just measure kind of the scale of the problem, or kind of put it in context.
I mean, that's a tricky question. Like if we look back at Me Too, we saw how many institutions were riddled with abuse. I will say, and actually for my next book, I spent some time talking to women survivors from within the Catholic Church. And the scale of abuse within the Catholic Church, even for me, who deals with this pretty regularly, it was staggering. So I think part of what makes it different within a church is churches where a lot of vulnerable people go. Churches where people go with their hearts wide open. Church is some place that if you plan on being a predator, you plan on preying on people, there are easy victims there. So in a way, it's like churches need to recognize the abuse crisis, if only so that pastors can get educated on what to look for and how to safeguard the vulnerable people within their churches. So I think that's part of it. Now, in denominations where your leader is elevated based on things like charisma or certain God-given gifts, I'm making air quotes, then I have noticed there's almost more of an effort to protect them. And I don't know if, like, this is just me guessing. I don't know if part of that is the insecurity, like they made up their ordination, they didn't have to go through all the hoops. I don't know. But there's a degree to which in those sorts of churches, when there is an allegation, the wall of protection around that pastor goes up fast and high. If the abuser is a pastor, if the abuser is a leader within that church, because the church or the wider institution relies upon their credibility, and if you lose the hub, the whole thing can come apart. And I think then that leads into some of the cover-up and the mishandling of abuse, because in the eyes of someone who was a true believer in that abuse, that pastor accused of abuse, you're not only threatening them, you're threatening the faith of the entire community. Then it becomes almost utilitarian, like the cost of this one victim versus all these people and their faith, which, forgets this person's likely to abuse again. Like, it forgets this is criminal activity that should go to the police. It forgets a lot, but I think it's complicated by that spiritual lens.
Yeah, there's like a desire for grace. On the one hand, there's a desire, but then that can be misapplied in the sense of not protecting the victim and not really getting to the bottom of something, or not allowing for consequences, which grace can mean the removal of consequences, obviously. Even in Christian theology, there's a large part of that it means that, but that's not the only thing it is, and it doesn't imply the removal of all consequences to everything you do, right? It's like, it's not a license, essentially, and their apostles, right? Apostle Paul and like Romans will make a large point about how license to, like, grace does not give license to sin, license to do things. That would be like, that's in direct contradiction to grace and what it's supposed to be there for. And like, this is like moving us into the church world, which I know, in the religious world in America, the Christian evangelical religious world, but even deeper. I want to start to kind of think and talk about Moscow, the sons of patriarchy, the church there, Doug Wilson, Canon Press. So, and I just got to ask, in your reporting on it, why go to live in Moscow? Why be there? Why did you need to test it on the ground? Or maybe what was there that you couldn't maybe see from afar, or just do research online or something like that? Why did you have to go and be there?
So I feel like I now have an old relationship with the people of Moscow, and they say Moscow, Idaho. So I first wrote a story for Vice magazine in 2021. And I had actually been working on a whole other story, and I stumbled into this one, and someone basically said, hey, these folks need help. And they're starting to get attention with this tiny, tiny little online podcast, which was started by a Seventh-day Adventist pastor who had heard about abuse within Doug Wilson's Christ Church. And it was little, like it was on YouTube. But I started watching, I thought, what? Like, my question marks and my skepticism were pretty high. And with that story, and it took months and months, it was a lot of research. I had plenty of documentation. And with that, I guess I'm the one who exposed the history of mishandling of abuse within Wilson's Christ Church and related entities. So I also wrote about some of these other survivors within Disobedient Women, my book. So there is a degree to which, like, I've been out there, but people who read this story and people who live in this small town that Wilson has been attempting his takeover of for years, I think there's a degree to which when you're in your bubble and your day-to-day is this brash pastor who says hateful things and sets things on fire, and his acolytes try to take over your city council, and there's this constant tension over real estate because not only do they want to take over hearts and minds, like they want to own the majority of the land, there's a lot happening in that town. And that Vice story, as I learned when I most recently was there, for some people who are within the church, that was the first time they questioned. And the first time they questioned Wilson directly. And so when I was invited, like, I went for a speaking engagement. I was invited by a local whistleblower who is in my book. She is the majority owner of Sons of Patriarchy. And when she asked, I felt like I had to say yes. What I did not expect was what we saw in the room, which was, the theater was packed. There were some people like just standing around in the back. I'm a mom from Ohio. I write about things that used to be niche and now they're not. But I have never felt such a warm embrace from a community of people. And they were just so grateful to talk about this. It's not even an elephant in the room. It's like, I can't think of an animal big enough to be the situation they're dealing with. And to see their neighbors, like it wasn't me, it wasn't Peter, it was seeing their neighbors and seeing who else was willing to show their face as someone willing to listen. Not that they agreed with me, but just willing to listen. And afterward, we went to a cafe, and I just kept hearing from people. The CNN interview had just come out, and it was like national news all of a sudden. And Wilson and some of his buddies, not necessarily Wilson, were kind of like patting themselves on the back at the local coffee shop over the CNN interview that much of the country was freaking out about. And here they were in a theater talking about the damage they've seen caused by this theology for the people they care about, for their neighbors, for the lives it's affecting. And they were able to ask questions and able to just be honest about it in a way that they usually can't. So for me, it was a gift. I write a lot at a distance. If I have enough funding, I'm able to fly in and visit people I'm reporting on. But some folks, one of the sources in my book, Eleanor Skelton, I wrote about them for years before I was able to go and sit, and then we spent days together. So there's this access that people will give you to their lives is very sacred. For all the ways people roll their eyes at our reporters, if you're doing it right, you're earning trust. And for me, being able to be in Moscow and see the lasting impact, not just of my work, but the courage of people in their town who spoke up before the rest of them got the nerve up, that's a gift.
Yeah, that is amazing. And I would love to just level set. I've realized when I ask, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page about what's going on with the Doug Wilson. Who is Doug Wilson? What's the church? And why is this such an issue? Why do you feel like whatever they're bringing out and teaching and influencing, why that needs to be directly challenged?
Yeah. So, folks, I feel like a lot of people now at least are familiar with the name, since he went on national TV and said women are the kind of people come out of. And one of his acolytes suggested, repealing the 19th Amendment might be a good idea. I think that for many Americans was the first taste of what Christian patriarchy is. And this is a central tenet, and it's something that's getting missed a lot. Doug Wilson is a proud Christian nationalist. He has said he wants to take over Moscow and then have us be in a Christian country, Christian world. But a major element in that isn't just that he's mean to women. It's that there is this understanding of hierarchy where women are to be submissive to men and the people within a church are to be submissive to their pastor. And these layers of submission act as a trap, but they're also a model for how that hierarchy can be applied to the country. So for all of the individual cases of abuse that I've reported on, or that people have just emailed me or messaged me saying, I don't know who else to tell, but this happened to me. So I'm a well of people's secrets. And seeing that, I feel like those folks who've already lived the microcosm version, which is in your family how Christian patriarchy works, can clue us into how that can be nationalized. Because all of it is about power and who has it and who doesn't. And Wilson spoke in that on last week and had some, not great things to say about increasing diversity in this country, especially with Muslim people. Like in a Christian nation, Muslims, Jewish people, women, queer people, Black people. He's careful to dodge those questions around slavery now, but those false dichotomies will be imposed. Like that is all baked in. I don't know if to me that's the big banner message around Wilson. Of what people may not realize is he's been writing these things, saying these things for decades. So he built a church, built a school, built a small college, all these things that have drawn people to Moscow. But he also started the Classical Christian Association of Classical Christian Schools, which is a way of sending information out. He's written curricula that kids learn and read in schools. His publishing house has legitimized some of the dreadful things he has written about women especially, but people in general, his theology. And it makes it feel real and credible to have it in a book. And then it's something you can pick up at your homeschool conference. You can trade between friends or do a book study at your church. And he has said, he didn't move. The country moved to him. And he's right. Like, he used to be considered the crazy uncle of evangelicalism. And now it's, with his influence, Pete Hegseth, or I want to say Department of Defense, Department of War secretary, belongs to one of his churches. I forgot my list. Wilson started a denomination. So there are also churches with copycat pastors trying to do what he's doing in Moscow, scattered all over the place.
Yeah, we had Sam Perry on, not the one you're probably thinking of.
I know Sam Perry
from Baylor. Yeah. So like he wrote an article about the CREC, CREC.
Yeah. CREC.
And it was fascinating. I had no idea. But I'm curious, like, is the little offshoot church they've got in DC now, is it now just Idaho and DC kind of where his reach is, or does he have churches like in other states?
Oh, there's churches all over. And there are plenty of pastors who are not CREC who love Wilson and will preach and refer to his books. Like it's all over the place. I will say that at first week in DC, I heard from some friends, a lot of that congregation was reporters. So, I don't know. Like,
I mean,
tales of his success in the packed churches may not all be sympathetic believers in DC. I used to live in DC. It's a different city, though.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure any pastor that plants a church would love for reporters to show up, except maybe like the CREC, or maybe they would. I don't know. Maybe that's.
They love the attention.
All press is good press. Well, come on.
Yeah,
that's right.
I've written stories that Canon Press, Wilson's publishing arm. They'll retweet it and like put up a kind of trolly Elmo on fire gif, but they'll share it. Any press is good press. I was briefly cited in the Associated Press article about Wilson's weekend, and it is like there is plenty of critical information in this article. They were delighted. They tweeted it. It's shameless.
Well, what's the appeal for Wilson, or for people to kind of like flock towards Wilson's teaching? Like, is he just tapping into something that's already been there, but doing it a lot more effectively than others have? Kind of like in the same way where it's like, Trump has seemed to garner a hold over Christians. And, 20 years ago, you'd be like, yeah, that would never happen. But here it is. So I'd love to just hear, like why Wilson? Like, what about him makes him so special?
Just honestly, lucky timing. I really think that's what it is. So in the book and just in various articles I've written, I've been following figures like Bill Gothard or James Dobson, folks who laid the groundwork, and the theologians who influenced them, like Rushdoony. All of this is like the field was set. And then you add in someone like Donald Trump, who has pushed the envelope on what is normal, what sort of words we can find acceptable from someone in a leadership position. And it's perfect. I mean, it's very, very lucky for Wilson. I will say something I've been thinking about a lot. I heard an old interview with Martin E. Marty, the theologian, and he mentioned how evangelicals, though they want, they want to harken back to the good old days and take us back to conservative traditional versions of their version of what history was. What they're great at is using modern media better than their peers. And so when it was Gothard, he had a publishing house. He was putting his lectures on VHS, and people were like plugging those into the VCR in their church basement. When it was Dobson, he had his mailing list, he had his radio programs. He started collecting names. He was reaching into people's homes. Wilson done one better. He's got his publishing house. He's been connected with schools all over the country, which is like how Hegseth, I believe, found him. But he's also like Canon Press is also Canon Plus, which is a streaming service. So if as many of us, like all of us in our own way, tend to live in silos of information, if you want to opt into an even tighter silo, then you subscribe to Canon Press, and then you're already reading the books. You get films where someone like Wilson and his pals look, their men will be men, and they play Johnny Cash in the background, smoke cigars. And so there's the bro side of the Theo bro is evident. So it layers in media and things that have been familiar in the evangelical ecosystem for generations now, which also just lends credibility. Like, this idea of Christian patriarchy is not new. It's just presented differently. And now it's got a much better shot of being effective due to the change in our politics and the embrace of Christian nationalism.
Yeah, it's like, it's so interesting to me that people can, that they can get influenced in this way, right? And it's almost as simple, it's a tried and true method of working through, and doing the steps that are going to get you to a place that you can actually start to get that influence out there. You can get these things published. You can put them out and start to get a following. And it's like they know what they're doing. They're very savvy. They're and they're very committed to this message. very committed to this message. And I think that there is a power in that. And I would love for you to kind of help us understand. I know we've kind of talked about patriarchy and talked about, and kind of, it's almost like we've assumed how like the negative part of that. And I know not completely, you've talked about there's been abuse, and we haven't cataloged exactly the nature of that abuse, like here on the show yet. And that there's been not only abuse, but other negative, like the influence that they have, the reproducibility they're having in other places. I would love for you to talk more about why, like the aim, and help us understand the aim of this countercultural movement that they're calling it, right? What do you think they're, like, what are they trying to do? Full takeover? Like what is it? And what's so what does that look like? I guess, like, how would that even happen? I guess, like, obviously having anyone that's around that would want to do something that you would think would be a step, like a major step backwards, morally wrong, whatever. We don't like that in the marketplace of ideas. And I'm not just saying this is just another idea out there, but what I mean is, like, what is it like? Where are they going with this? Yeah, they're taking over, but what does taking over look like? And why should we be afraid of it?
Yeah, so, well, and the be afraid of it, I always want to like throw in some caution. Like, Doug Wilson's been trying to take over a small town in Idaho for decades, and he still hasn't.
Right.
So he may take over the country before he takes over Moscow, Idaho. So, I think, here's an example. So something that was referenced in the CNN interview is the idea of householder voting, which on its surface is a way of saying, women should submit to men, and within a church. So like, we'll just do it within a church. Within your household, your head of household votes. It just so happens that because we believe women need to submit to men, that in almost every case, your head of household will be a man. So, like, that's the way that things function in the church. Take that a step farther, then you have arguments like, well, we've seen in our church how well this can work. So, maybe we don't need the 19th Amendment. It's so much smoother and easier when women are not watering down men's votes. And we've seen this in national elections. There's a gender gap. Women tend to vote for Democrats in slightly higher numbers. Men tend to vote Republican. So then you expand that out. If you have that happening in enough churches around the country, it starts to be a little more normal. Now, will they be able, just because Doug Wilson and friends say repeal the 19th? Probably not. But what we've seen with other attempts around, like, voter registration laws, that it would more dramatically impact women, the effect is the same. And then if in your church community you've gotten used to the idea that you shouldn't have a vote, and that women voting has atomized the family and caused conflict in the family, then you're going to have a population of people who are more willing to relinquish those rights. So it's not going to be a straight, like, I don't know, sports, whatever, you shoot the ball, it goes right in. It's not that. But it's a major element within a broader effort to kind of rein women and other vulnerable communities in. So if you think about the way like conservative folks have responded to trans rights, a lot of the ways some of these churches used to talk, and churches is too broad, parachurch communities, extreme communities, used to talk about the dangers of women having power. I hear a lot of resonance in the way people now respond to trans people. It's almost like this threat to the gender binary is it's complicated. I'm not. Does that get at what you're asking? I feel like I wandered at the end there.
No, it's okay. No, it's
yeah,
good.
you're fine. And for those that are listening, not watching, Josh did a thumbs up in response to.
Yeah, I always forget. Yes, I did a thumbs up. Yes, that was great.
Yes,
Thank you for answering
I saw your thumb. Thanks.
We were closed caption for the. I don't know. Anyways, I'm curious. This question may not make sense, so I'm going to try my best.
The answer may not make sense. So,
like, I'm curious about like the theological underpinnings of what Wilson is doing, because it's like, when we talk about other concepts like the New Apostolic Reformation, they're like it's a little bit easier, I think, to kind of draw that line maybe to a Bible verse or some sort of like deeper theological sort of understanding of end times or something. And you also mentioned Rushduni earlier too, so I'd love to get your analysis on like what's the what's the biblical push or the basis to get like theobros to start questioning their testosterone levels, or get women to celebrate wanting to, I don't know, be obedient to their husbands. Like does that question make somewhat sense?
yeah, and I mean, I spent years reading the Bible as a kid who, like, I wanted to be a minister at one point and was presented with this idea that in some verses women needed to remain silent, and somehow that was bigger and more important than the women who were in leadership positions. So I don't know that I can articulate a biblical defense. What I can say is that the Bible is used and relied upon in order to claim that women have to be in these submissive roles. And that goes back to Rushduni, and there's a thread straight through Gothard to Wilson. And I think I want to say, if you see the world and you see the country in a way where power is endowed by God, and that power can only be in certain trusted hands, then you can accept that there will be people who don't have that power. So I think it becomes comfortable to have that, like, actualizing how you deal with people in your family who you love. This is one of those things where, like, being curious can be helpful, but then there's a limit, because for the other vulnerable population, children. So when you're in this view of the world where those on top have power, your responsibility is to have those under your authority acting in what you're told is a godly way. So if, in Wilson's, one of his examples, if a woman is not doing the dishes and you correct her and she does not comply, then you take her before the elders and she can be disciplined by the church for not doing her wifely chores. For children, if you do not comply, and this was a big internet skirmish, someone pulled up a video, I think a year ago, of Nancy Wilson describing picking up their daughter when she was young, like 3, 4, and like a normal kid, she wanted to stay with her friend and whined a little, and Nancy told her, no, when I come to pick you up, you have to greet me cheerfully, and she spanked her. And then there was the understanding that in the future, if you do not do what we wish, which we're saying is godly because we're your parents, because we have that power dynamic over you, corporal punishment will be provided. And not just in Wilson's community, all across evangelicalism. Like, one of the figures we haven't talked about enough recently is Dobson, but he normalized this same corporal punishment based upon these layers of power. And I get it. Like, I've talked to parents who love their kids, who spank their kids or beat their kids with belts or dowel rods or all manner of objects because they were taught by someone like Dobson that to do so would make them spiritually compliant in a way that God needs them to be. So every time they hit their kid, they thought they were saving them from hell. But for the kid who wears years of trauma, like I've interviewed a woman, a person in their 20s, who said every time they hear a belt unclasp, they jump because they're hit so much. So it's, I don't even remember the question, but like this is what I think we need to understand. Underneath it is this understanding of power, and those in the position of power have a duty to correct those who must submit to them.
You know, I'm curious, and I should have asked this earlier. You've already kind of described one type of abuse, but at the top you had mentioned, you know, Doug Wilson kind of being at the center of a lot of these sort of abuse cases or instances. I'd love for you to just kind of maybe talk a little bit more, like what type of abuse are we referring to? Like, is it all physical, emotional, you know, spiritual? I'd love for you to just kind of talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so is this just the book? Is this Disobedient Women? And then I'll walk through a few cases.
Just broadly, yeah. Just however you can define abuse in the context of, you know, Doug Wilson and his ministry.
Okay, so Wilson specifically, as part of this understanding of submission, I've interviewed women who believed they did not have the ability to say no to their husband. And so they were raped violently and repeatedly. And one, you know, talked to her friend at church and described what was going on. And her friend said, oh, this is normal. Now, Wilson, since I've reported on this, has been at pains to say he does not condone marital rape. But this is the result that is happening within his community. So there's one example. I don't want to like act like he's the only bad guy though. Like he's the flavor of the week. Many of the other women in this book were just assaulted or raped by church leaders. They were part of communities that when they did tell would not take them seriously. Krista Brown, who spent over 15 years documenting cases of abuse within the Southern Baptist Convention, when she first stepped forward, she just wanted a little bit of help paying for therapy. SBC was paying for therapy, talking about grace before. SBC was willing to pay for therapy for the abusers in order to reform the pastors so that he could get them back in the pulpit, but would not pay for therapy for the people that they hurt. Like, it's, and then when you're in an institution that large where like you come forward with your story and someone laughs at you, or someone eventually, like Jules Woodson, the pastor who assaulted her when she was a teenager, when that news broke, he got up on stage and he confessed and everyone gave him a standing ovation. So, like, how do you qualify abuse in that case? Is it the assault? Is it the years of cover-up? Is it the reflection you see in the faces of these other church members who are willing to stand behind someone who did something wrong because he's a man they trust and he stood up and he told the truth finally after he was outed on the internet? I've interviewed so many people who tell me the first assault, or if it was a series of assaults, that pales in comparison to what they dealt with from the institution. SBC, my God, like the amount of doxing that these survivors have gone through, people sharing their information online, sharing, like they have kids. They come forward knowing how much they are risking, and I am always leery of sharing anyone's story with their name for the first time, because I know what it's gonna be like. I don't think anyone should have to live through that. Let alone one day their kid Googles their name and the first thing they find is the worst thing that ever happened to them. But it's the attacks. It's just the direct attacks from people who prefer to be in the institution's corner.
So this might feel like an insensitive question, and I do not mean it this way at all. After that, because those accounts of abuse are just like, it's awful. There's no other way to say it, just wrong, awful. But I guess that's always, just in our conversation, I was thinking like, I got spanked when I was young. And, I don't look back and think I was abused. Now, maybe by a modern standard, you know what I mean? I was, or like today, by today's standards, I was. I mean, I think I've spanked my son, when he was a kid, like really small, a couple times with my hand, and we don't ever spank. But that was definitely like taught to me, and that's what I experienced. And I don't necessarily spank because it just kind of feels ineffective, right? There's not an effective. It wasn't necessarily about, I felt like it was abusive, although certainly it can be. And right, of course, what's that line? And I guess my question is, and even like people I've met who they are supporters of like complementarianism, say, but they're not taking it to this extreme that you might be seeing, where the woman is taken in front of the church and disciplined because she didn't do the dishes or didn't do something right. Like but you do have people that think that, but they wouldn't go to that extreme. I guess what has your interaction been with? I'm really curious about, in particular, women. Have there been women who have brought very positive, like explanations of the church or anything like that? Or is it like in your work, because of what you focus on, that just doesn't really come up?
So certainly there are some women who live in less extreme circumstances and they're lucky. Like, I was talking to someone about this the other day. I think if abuse were to happen, if you have someone who relishes in this kind of sadistic role, so more than like, a couple of times you spanked your child, if your church, say, sold, and I've reported on a church who did this, sold rods for correcting children at the church. Like, if it's
That's
sanctioned,
wild.
if it's sanctioned by God, it comes out differently. And then when it's sanctioned by God, then you can start to absorb other influences. Like beyond Dobson, there were the Pearls. There were people who gave advice that was more extreme. So certainly there are some families where people can navigate, and I've had women say, for years I said I submitted to him, but really, like, we talk things through. And then there's a turn. Now, surely you're right. People who want to talk to me have been through it.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
a long time, was one of few people reporting on the more extreme cases. So that's part of it. But I don't want to introduce a slippery slope.
No, of
But
course not.
a lot of folks have told me it started with one book that the
Mm.
women brought home from a homeschool conference, and then they gave it to their husband. They suggested it, and it wasn't natural for their husband. It came out all wrong, and eventually destroyed the marriage. So I think the safest way is just to approach every human being as if they're of equal worth and protect them as well as you can. Because just the variety of stories I've heard, whenever that one side rises to a level of power of the
Right.
other one, things can get rough really fast.
These these women that you speak to, number one, you have all the props and accolades from me, because I don't know how you can just get all these stories in your brain and then continue to just live a normal life. It's kind of like today in politics, right? It's like, oh yeah, our democracy is under under threat, but I am hungry, so I'm gonna go to McDonald's. So like with all these stories that you keep, how do you like balance that level of empathy for the victims, while also like sharply criticizing the communities that they may still be in, if that makes sense. Like it just seemed like it'd be quite the dance. So tell us about maybe like that process. Like how do you do that?
So when the book first came out, and I even have a little paragraph or two where I said, you compartmentalize because you have to. I realized I was not succeeding in compartmentalizing. There was one case, a lawsuit. I remember I was as you do, just reading at the coffee shop to get out of my office, and I almost threw up. Right there at my table, because the abuse described of this child was so awful. I realize I put my guard up a little bit with people who are interested in spending time with children. And usually it's because they're just good people who want to help kids. But I always have a question mark, why? I think the book itself, so there are threads of my own story in that book, and I don't think they would have been there if I'd written it today. But as I was writing the book, my dad was dying. He was alcoholic. He was abusive when I was a kid. My mom had dementia. She died earlier this year. I was dealing with a lot of my own semi-repressed memory surfacing. So that's through the book in a way that I would organize differently today. And I didn't intend for it to be in the book, but I also felt like it ended up being a helpful illustration, which is, such a writer's way of looking at this. But as a kid, I prayed to God to save me from my dad. He was that scary. I needed God to protect me from him. My sources believe they were being hurt because that's what God intended. And being able to draw that bright line, to me, helped readers who aren't from these communities, who maybe have been through some stuff, see where the differences are, and maybe just start to imagine what it would be like to be them. As for criticizing communities that are covering up for mishandling abuse, that's easy. That I'm a big believer in the truth, and I think as I have witnessed over and over the agony and the destruction that people go through in order to tell the truth, I have no sympathy for millionaires whose whatever is going to be destabilized a little bit by reality coming out when what they've built is based on sand. No, too bad. Sorry.
I really love that. No, I love that. I think that's really noble, and I think there's a sense of righteous anger at the abuse and obviously, just the horrible things that are done in the name of God. It reminds me of the second commandment, not to make images of God, and the real thrust of that passage of not attributing something to God that he didn't, don't put God's name on something that he didn't do or asked to be done. And it just kind of reminds me of how damaging it is when someone sees something ultimate and they're told that this ultimate being, this is how they see them, or this is how they would treat them, or this is how they would, view them, and how damaging that would be psychologically and in every way, especially to a child.
Yeah.
That would be damaging to anybody, let alone as a child. So it's just awful. And I just so appreciate your work in exposing this. I guess my last question is, where do you see signs of reform? Are there places where you see, hey, they're doing it right, or there has been repentance, or they have implemented these policies, or they have, and if there's nothing on that end, whether it's just like you don't know it or it's not there, what gives you hope as you're moving forward with your work?
Well, it's not in the SBC. I'll say that. After years of votes demanding reform, they're not doing it. I get asked this question a lot, and I think it's because I'm such a downer that people need some little boost. Right when the book came out, a minister in my town invited Krista, who I mentioned before, to our town, to his church, and invited clergy to the church, and had her and an expert. His name's Jimmy Hinton. His father was a serial child molester who had been in the pulpit, and Jimmy turned him in. So they came and talked to clergy about how do you spot a predator. And then, though Krista would not call it a sermon, this pastor invited her to speak Sunday morning at his church. And I think the healing that it will take is not going to happen on these broad scales. It doesn't happen with cliques and influence and the way that evangelicalism has grown. It happens in these small moments where individuals take time to listen and heal. And I will say, like, anytime I'm out there, and it happened at this church too, at least a couple people come up to me, and I may be the first person they've told, but they say it happened to me. I mean, someone in their 70s or 80s who never felt safe. And if you can make a space within a church where it is safe to be who you are and talk about what you're carrying around, that's huge. I think that does reach out to the whole of that person and show that they are of value. And if you believe in God, then there's a way to show God's love. As far as this country, I mean,
I'm just gonna go have McDonald's,
yeah, but I went to Moscow and we had a full theater of people opposed to Christian nationalism. So I think there, in a twisted way, there is something to learn from these self-appointed figures who thought it's so important that someone listened to them. You with your microphones, like getting out there, telling people they're not alone, educating people. There is great value in that, and I do find hope there.
I love that. I love that. Is there a place, a preferred vendor that you would have for the book? And what do you have? What's your next project? How can people follow you, essentially, connect with what you're doing?
So I am on Substack. It's called In Polite Company. And my Disobedient Women should be anywhere. I know it was out of stock at Bookshop a couple of weeks ago, but it should be back there. And I just turned in the manuscript for my next book, which comes out next September. It's called Damned If She Does. And it's about the millions of women who have exited the church in the last few years.
Wow. Well, we'll have to have you back on to talk about that for sure. And thank you so much, Sarah, for coming and spending some time with us today, giving us your insight, letting us borrow you and your mind for a little bit here.
Great. Thank you. It was wonderful.
Absolutely. And to our viewers, guys, thanks for joining us. Like, subscribe, do the stuff that hacks the algorithm. If you're listening, share this with somebody else, somebody who needs to hear this. And we're going to put show notes in the show notes, links to all this stuff that we've been talking about today. And if you need help, reach out, find somebody, let somebody know. And yeah, guys, until next time, keep your conversations not right or left, but up, and we'll see you then.
Bye.